The check didn't look real at first. It was too large, too clean, too calmly placed in my sister's hands, like it had been waiting for this moment longer than any of us had. $410,000, written neatly across the line, the ink still dark enough to catch the light. People stood up. Someone clapped. Someone gasped. Someone whispered the number out loud, just to hear how it sounded in the room. My sister cried immediately. Loud, shaking tears that demanded attention. She pressed the check against her chest like it was proof of something she'd always believed about herself. "I don't even know what to say," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. My father smiled. Not broadly. Not proudly. More like someone who had just completed a task he knew would echo longer than the moment itself. He let the reactions play out. The hugs. The congratulations. The comments about how lucky she was. How generous he was. Then he turned to me. The room quieted just enough for me to notice. "You're patient," he said, resting his hand briefly on my shoulder. "You'll be fine." That was it. No envelope. No check. No explanation. Just that sentence, offered gently, like reassurance instead of omission. I smiled because I knew how. I had learned early how to keep my expression neutral when something uneven landed in front of me. I even nodded, as if that single sentence balanced the weight of what everyone had just witnessed. But I felt the shift immediately. Not jealousy. Not anger. Recognition. People glanced at me quickly, then away again, embarrassed on my behalf. Others didn't bother hiding their confusion. "She already got hers," someone murmured. "Maybe there's more later," someone else guessed. I didn't correct anyone. My sister was still crying, still talking, still being celebrated. The check changed hands as relatives leaned in to look at it, as if the amount might change if they stared long enough. My father stepped back, watching quietly. His eyes met mine for just a moment. Not apologetic. Not guilty. Measured. That look stayed with me long after the room returned to conversation. Later that evening, after people left and the excitement thinned into exhaustion, my sister talked non-stop. About plans. About freedom. About how this changed everything. She never once asked why I hadn't received anything. She didn't need to. Everyone had already decided what the story was. She had been chosen. I had been passed over. That narrative settled quickly, comfortably, like furniture no one intended to move again. But as I drove home that night, the check replayed in my mind. Not the number. The context. The audience. The way my father had made it public, unmistakable, and final-looking. It didn't match him. He was careful. Methodical. Private with things that mattered. He never handled money theatrically. Never made decisions without structure. Never rewarded impulse. Yet he had handed my sister a fortune in front of witnesses. And left me with patience. At a red light, I rested my hands on the steering wheel and breathed out slowly. Something about that moment felt unfinished. Not wrong. Just incomplete. People assumed patience meant waiting for fairness. I knew better. In our family, patience meant you were being measured. And the measuring wasn't over yet. The money changed my sister immediately. Not in small ways. Not gradually. It was like a switch flipped the moment the check cleared, as if restraint had been the only thing holding her back from becoming the version of herself she'd always imagined she deserved to be. She quit her job first. Not because she hated it, but because she could. She announced it at dinner, pushing her phone across the table to show us the resignation email she'd already sent. "I just don't want to answer to anyone anymore," she said, smiling. "I want options." Everyone nodded. My aunt called her brave. My cousins said they were jealous. My father said nothing. He just listened, hands folded, eyes thoughtful. Within months, everything around her upgraded. A new car appeared in her driveway, glossy and impractical. Then renovations. Then trips. Lots of trips. Beaches, resorts, expensive dinners photographed from flattering angles. Her social media turned into a highlight reel of freedom and confidence. She talked about investments constantly. Crypto one week. A friend's startup the next. Real estate seminars she never finished. She spoke in buzzwords, not numbers, but no one questioned her. Confidence covered the gaps. People asked about me, usually when she wasn't around. So, how are you feeling about all of this? You must be being very mature about it. At least you're responsible. Responsible again. I smiled and told them I was fine, because I was. Not because I had no feelings, but because nothing about my sister's spending surprised me. It confirmed what I already knew. She didn't see money as structure. She saw it as permission. What surprised people was how quiet I stayed. I didn't complain. I didn't ask questions. I didn't hint at resentment. That silence made them uneasy, like they were missing a reaction they were supposed to witness. At family gatherings, my sister dominated conversations. She talked about her next move, her next plan, her next escape. She never mentioned the balance shrinking. Never acknowledged the speed. My father watched her the same way he watched weather patterns. Calm. Observant. Detached. He didn't intervene. What he did instead was start calling me. Late evenings. Short conversations. Can you stop by this weekend? I want your help organizing some things. Just paperwork. He never said why. He didn't need to. I had spent my life understanding what he meant when he didn't explain. At his house, we sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by folders and old files. He moved slower than he used to. Lost track of where he'd put things. Forgot details he once knew by heart. I filled in the gaps quietly. I didn't talk about my sister's spending. He didn't mention the check. Instead, we reviewed accounts. Timelines. Documents that hadn't been touched in years. He asked my opinion more often now, though he still framed it as confirmation, not trust. You're good with details, he said. Always have been. That was the closest he came to acknowledgement. Meanwhile, my sister's lifestyle grew louder as the foundation thinned. She borrowed casually, assuming more would come. She hinted that Dad would help if she ever really needed it. He wouldn't let me struggle, she said once. I didn't respond. Because I knew something she didn't. My father wasn't watching her spend to rescue her later. He was watching to see if she noticed the limit. She didn't. And with every purchase, every impulsive decision, every confident assumption, the gap between us grew wider, not in money, but in awareness. She believed the check was the story. I was beginning to understand it was only the opening scene. My father never talked about money directly with me. Not in the way people expect. There were no grand explanations, no speeches about fairness or legacy. Instead, there were tasks. Requests framed as favors. Moments that looked ordinary unless you were paying attention. Can you help me organize some things? He asked one evening, standing in the doorway of my apartment like he'd rehearsed the line. Just paperwork, he added quickly, as if to keep it small. I said yes without hesitation. I always did. At his house, the kitchen table filled slowly with folders. Some were familiar: bank statements, insurance policies, tax documents. Others were older, heavier, their edges softened by time. He moved through them carefully, slower than he used to, pausing to remember where things belonged. I noticed the changes he tried to hide. The repeated questions. The way he double-checked dates he once knew instinctively. The way his confidence flickered when decisions stacked up too quickly. I didn't comment. I just worked. We fell into a rhythm. I sorted. I labeled. I digitized. He watched, occasionally nodding, occasionally correcting me. The work stretched into hours, then weeks. I started coming by regularly, always at his request, never announced to anyone else. My sister never came. She's busy, he said once, not defensively, just factually. As we organized, I began to see the shape beneath the surface. Accounts that weren't discussed at family dinners. Investments my sister had never mentioned. Structures designed not for excitement, but endurance. One night, while filing documents back into a cabinet, I noticed a folder tucked behind others. No label. No color coding. Just thick. Inside was a trust. Not the will everyone knew about. Not the one discussed casually over holidays. This was older. More deliberate. Its language was precise, almost cold. Designed to function without emotion. I didn't react. I didn't bring it to the table. I read quietly, absorbing details the way I always had. And then I saw it. A clause. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't highlighted. It sat there like an afterthought, written in dense legal language most people would skim. It addressed early distributions. Stated clearly that any funds taken before death would be deducted from final inheritance. There was no ambiguity. Early gifts weren't bonuses. They were advances. My sister's check wasn't generosity. It was accounting. I closed the folder carefully and slid it back where I'd found it. My father watched me from across the table, his expression unreadable. "You find everything you needed?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded, satisfied. We didn't talk about the trust. We didn't talk about my sister. We didn't talk about the future. But something shifted after that. He started asking me different questions. Not if things were in order, but how. Not whether something mattered, but why. He asked me to keep copies. To make notes. To double-check beneficiaries. Just in case, he said again. I understood what he was doing, even if he never named it. He wasn't testing me. He was confirming something he already knew. Weeks later, as I packed up to leave, he stopped me at the door. "You've always been good at waiting," he said, almost thoughtfully. I smiled, the familiar expression slipping into place. "Yes," I replied. But as I drove home that night, the word felt different. Waiting wasn't what I'd been doing. I had been watching. And now I understood the rules of the game my sister didn't even know she was playing. The check she spent so freely wasn't the reward. It was the subtraction. And the longer I stayed silent, the more intact the remainder became. Time has a way of exposing what intentions try to hide. The years after I found the trust clause passed quietly for me and loudly for my sister. From the outside, it probably looked like she was thriving while I stayed small. Her life was full of motion. Mine was full of patience. She moved houses twice. Each place larger than the last. Each upgrade announced like a milestone she'd earned rather than financed. She hosted parties that spilled late into the night, always generous, always surrounded by people who admired her confidence and envied her freedom. When the money flowed easily, so did the attention. I stayed steady. I kept my job. I kept my routines. I showed up for my father when he asked, which became more often than anyone noticed. He never asked me to take over his life. Just pieces of it. Bills he didn't want to think about. Appointments he forgot to write down. Documents he wanted reviewed, one more time. I watched his health change in increments small enough to ignore if you weren't paying attention. He lost weight. He tired faster. His memory faltered just enough to make him angry with himself. My sister rarely saw it. She called him from wherever she happened to be, loud and distracted, full of stories about herself. "I'll visit soon," she'd say. "Things are just crazy right now." Soon never came. The money thinned faster than she expected. I knew because she started asking questions that didn't sound like curiosity anymore. They sounded like anxiety. "Do you think the market will bounce back? Dad always said opportunities come around again. I mean, it's not like that was everything, right?" I answered carefully, truthfully, without revealing anything. My father never corrected her assumptions. He listened. He nodded. He changed the subject. What he did instead was tighten things quietly. He updated documents with me at his side. He confirmed details he'd once taken for granted. He asked me to make lists, then asked me to review them again. "You see things clearly," he said once, rubbing his temples. "You always have." I understood what he meant. I also understood that clarity isn't something you announce. It's something you protect. By the third year, my sister's lifestyle had become a balancing act. She sold the car for something more reasonable, though she framed it as a strategic decision. She stopped traveling as often. Her confidence stayed loud, but it strained at the edges. She asked my father for help once. Just once. It wasn't dramatic. She didn't beg. She framed it as temporary, a bridge until her next big thing landed. He listened, then told her he couldn't right now. That it wouldn't be responsible. She laughed it off publicly. She didn't call him for weeks after. I was there the day he admitted how tired he was. We sat at the same kitchen table where we'd sorted documents years earlier. The same light fell across the surface. "I thought giving her that money would teach her something," he said quietly. I didn't ask what lesson he meant. "I thought waiting would be easier for you," he added, almost to himself. I looked at him then, really looked. At the man who had always trusted structure more than emotion. Who believed systems could correct what conversations avoided. "It was," I said. He nodded, relieved by the answer. That night, as I drove home, I realized something important. My sister believed the years had passed her by unfairly. That she'd simply been unlucky after a strong start. I knew better. The years hadn't been neutral. They had been subtracting from her and preserving me. And the balance was no longer recoverable. The call came early in the morning, the kind that makes your body react before your mind catches up. I knew what it was before I answered. My father's health had been slipping quietly for months, and quiet things rarely reverse themselves. He was gone by the time I arrived. The house felt suspended, as if it hadn't decided how to breathe yet. His chair sat exactly where he'd left it. Papers were stacked neatly on the corner of the table, the way he always insisted they be. Order mattered to him, even at the end. My sister arrived later, sunglasses on, voice already cracking. She cried loudly, dramatically, the same way she always did when emotions became inconvenient. People gathered quickly. Relatives. Neighbors. Friends who hadn't called him in years but suddenly remembered his name. The assumptions started immediately. "She already got her inheritance," someone whispered, not unkindly. "At least he made sure both girls were taken care of. There probably isn't much left, but that's life." My sister heard them and relaxed. I could see it in her shoulders. Whatever grief she felt was cushioned by certainty. She believed the hard part was already behind her. The money part, at least. I stayed quiet. At the funeral, people spoke about generosity and fairness. About how my father believed in helping while he was alive. They referenced the check more than once, as if it were evidence of his values. My sister nodded along, accepting condolences like confirmations. I stood near the back, hands folded, listening to a story that wasn't wrong, just incomplete. The days that followed blurred together. Paperwork. Calls. Casseroles left at the door. My sister stayed busy talking. I stayed busy doing. The lawyer scheduled the reading for the following week. My sister wasn't worried. She joked about it, said it would be quick. "We already know how this goes," she told someone on the phone. I didn't correct her. The night before the meeting, I sat alone at my kitchen table with copies of documents my father and I had reviewed over the years. I didn't need to read them again. I already knew what they said. Still, I checked every page, every signature, every date. Everything was in order. What surprised me wasn't how prepared I felt, but how calm. I had imagined this moment for years without realizing it. Not the loss. The pause afterward. The point where waiting finally expired. At the lawyer's office the next morning, my sister arrived confident, already scrolling on her phone. She hugged me briefly, distracted. "Whatever happens," she said lightly, "we're good, right?" "Yes," I replied. And I meant it. Because what was about to happen wasn't personal. It was procedural. The lawyer greeted us and closed the door. He shuffled papers with practiced neutrality. The room settled into that strange stillness that happens when people believe they already know the ending. My sister leaned back in her chair. I leaned forward. The lawyer cleared his throat. "We'll begin," he said, "with the trust." My sister frowned. "What trust?" she asked. The word hung there, unfamiliar and heavy. In that moment, before another sentence was read, I understood something fully for the first time. Waiting hadn't just protected me financially. It had protected me emotionally. I wasn't bracing for impact. She was. And the difference between us, built quietly over years, had finally reached its conclusion. The lawyer opened the folder. And the room changed. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began the way they always do, with language designed to sound neutral even when it carries weight. "This trust," he said, tapping the folder, "was established several years ago and amended periodically." My sister shifted in her chair. I could see confusion forming, irritation close behind it. She glanced at me once, quickly, as if checking whether I looked as surprised as she felt. I didn't. The lawyer continued, outlining the purpose of the trust. Stability. Long-term planning. Fairness measured over time, not moments. My sister stopped leaning back. She sat upright now, her confidence thinning with every sentence. Then came the numbers. Not the total yet. Just references. Percentages. Conditions. And any distributions made prior to death, the lawyer said, voice steady, were structured as advances against the beneficiary's final share. My sister's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" she interrupted. The lawyer didn't look up. "It means early gifts reduce what remains." The room went silent. He turned a page. In this case, the sum of $410,000 was distributed early to one beneficiary. He said her name. Out loud. Formally. Final. My sister laughed once, short and sharp. "Okay, but that was separate. That was a gift." The lawyer finally looked at her. "No," he said calmly. "It was not." He read the next section slowly, as if pacing mattered. "The remaining balance of the trust, unclaimed and untouched by early distribution, is hereby assigned to the beneficiary who did not draw from it during the grantor's lifetime." He paused. Then he said my name. The sound of it felt unreal, like hearing yourself announced somewhere you never expected to belong. My sister froze. "No," she said louder now. "That's not right. He wouldn't do that." The lawyer slid a document across the table. "He did," he said. "And he was very clear." She skimmed the page desperately, her breathing shallow. "This isn't fair," she said. "I didn't know." "Ignorance," the lawyer replied gently, "does not void structure." I watched her hands shake as the truth settled. Not just that she wasn't getting more, but that what she'd already spent was all there ever was for her. The rest, the larger rest, had been preserved. For me. The lawyer continued, detailing figures that made the air feel heavier. Numbers my sister hadn't imagined existed. Numbers that explained my father's silence, his patience, his insistence on order. When the reading ended, no one spoke. My sister stared at the table, her mouth slightly open, as if she might argue again but couldn't find the words. The confidence she'd worn for years collapsed inward, replaced by disbelief and something close to panic. "This isn't what he meant," she said finally, looking at me now. "You know that." I met her eyes. "This is exactly what he meant," I said quietly. The lawyer closed the folder. "That concludes the reading," he said. My sister pushed her chair back abruptly and stood. "So you just waited?" she asked, anger flaring now. You just let me spend it. I stood as well, steady. I didn't let you do anything, I said. You chose. She shook her head, tears forming, not dramatic this time. Real. This isn't fair, she repeated. I didn't argue. Fairness had already spoken. As we left the office, she walked ahead of me, smaller than she'd ever looked. Outside, the world continued as if nothing had happened. Cars passed. People laughed. Life moved forward. For years, she had believed the check was the story. Now she understood what I had known all along. It was only the beginning. And patience, finally revealed, had told the truth. The silence after the reading was heavier than the shock itself. It followed us out of the lawyer's office, down the hallway, and into the parking lot where my sister stopped suddenly, as if her body had finally caught up to what her mind was still rejecting. She leaned against a car that wasn't hers and pressed her palms into her eyes. I didn't know, she said again, softer this time. Not to me. To the air. To the version of our father she thought would step in and fix it. I stood a few feet away and waited. That was the only thing I had ever been good at, apparently. Waiting without filling the space with excuses or apologies. Waiting without rushing to soothe discomfort that wasn't mine to manage. He should have told me, she added, anger flickering back in. If I'd known, I would have done things differently. I believed her. She would have spent more carefully. Asked smarter questions. Delayed gratification. But belief didn't change the structure. The trust hadn't been designed to reward intentions formed too late. It rewarded behavior observed over time. I didn't know either, I said finally. Not at first. She looked up at me then, really looked, as if trying to reconcile the sister she'd overlooked with the outcome she now faced. So you just watched? She asked. I shook my head. I lived. That answer frustrated her. I could see it. She wanted something more dramatic. An admission of strategy. A confession of secret planning. Something that would make this feel like betrayal instead of consequence. But there wasn't one. The weeks that followed were awkward in a way no one prepares you for. Family members reached out cautiously, unsure of which side they were allowed to acknowledge. Some apologized for assuming things. Others avoided the topic entirely, as if silence could rewind events. My sister withdrew. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just quietly enough to be noticeable. The confidence that had once defined her presence was replaced by something tentative. She stopped posting. Stopped hosting. Stopped explaining herself. I felt sympathy, but not guilt. Because guilt implies wrongdoing, and I had done nothing but exist within the boundaries my father created. The paperwork moved forward efficiently. Transfers. Confirmations. Meetings with advisors who spoke to me differently than they used to. Not with awe. With seriousness. Respect. Authority, I learned, doesn't arrive with fanfare. It arrives with expectation. I didn't change my lifestyle. That surprised people. They waited for upgrades, announcements, visible proof that the balance had shifted. When it didn't come, curiosity replaced judgment. You're so grounded, someone said. You're handling this well, said another. What I didn't say was that this wasn't sudden for me. I had been living inside this outcome long before anyone else noticed it forming. One afternoon, my sister called. Her voice was tired, stripped of performance. I keep thinking about the check, she said. About how proud I felt that day. I listened. I thought it meant I was trusted, she continued. Chosen. I closed my eyes briefly. He trusted you, I said. Just not with waiting. She was quiet for a long time. I don't know how you did it, she admitted. I considered the question carefully before answering. I didn't do anything special, I said. I just didn't mistake noise for security. We didn't resolve everything in that conversation. Some things don't resolve cleanly. But something shifted. Not reconciliation. Understanding. When the call ended, I sat alone for a while, thinking about how easily moments get misinterpreted when people only see the surface. A check looks like generosity. Waiting looks like absence. Silence looks like nothing. But silence is often where the real work happens. And waiting, when chosen deliberately, isn't passive. It's protective. The numbers had settled. The shock had passed. What remained was the long echo of decisions made years earlier, finally audible to everyone. One act remained. Not legal. Not financial. Personal. And it was the one that mattered most. The last thing to change wasn't the money. It was the story. For weeks after everything settled, people spoke carefully around me, as if they weren't sure which version of me they were allowed to acknowledge. The quiet one. The overlooked one. Or the one who had, apparently, known something they hadn't. I let them sort it out themselves. Because the truth was simpler than any version they'd invent. I hadn't waited because I was obedient. I hadn't waited because I was afraid. I hadn't waited because I trusted things would work out. I waited because I understood my father. He believed that money revealed character faster than hardship ever could. That sudden access exposed impulses, and restraint revealed intention. He believed in systems because systems didn't argue back. They didn't get emotional. They didn't bend under pressure. And he believed that patience wasn't passive. It was selective. Looking back, I can see all the moments where the outcome quietly took shape. The way he watched instead of corrected. The way he stayed silent when my sister assumed the check was the end of the story. The way he involved me not in celebration, but in structure. He never said, "This is what I'm doing." He showed it. My sister and I met months later, just the two of us, for coffee. No tension this time. Just honesty without performance. She looked different. Quieter. More grounded than I'd ever seen her. "I thought the money meant I was chosen," she said. Like proof. I nodded. "I thought the silence meant I wasn't." We sat with that for a moment. "I didn't know waiting could be a choice," she added. Neither did I. Not at first. Waiting had been something I endured before it became something I understood. Somewhere along the way, it turned into protection. It kept me from confusing excitement with stability. It kept me from spending what hadn't finished becoming mine yet. It also taught me something harder. That fairness doesn't always look fair in the moment. My father could have split everything evenly on paper and avoided all of this. He could have explained himself, softened the blow, reassured everyone. But he chose a different path. One that let behavior speak louder than intention. I don't know if he anticipated how painful that lesson would be. I only know he trusted it enough to stand by it. And he trusted me enough to wait. The inheritance didn't change who I was. It confirmed it. I still live carefully. I still read before I sign. I still pause when others rush. The money gave me options, not identity. What changed was my relationship with silence. I no longer see it as absence. I see it as space. Space to observe. Space to prepare. Space to let others reveal themselves without interference. My sister is rebuilding now. Slower. Smarter. Without shortcuts. We aren't the same, but we're honest in a way we never were before. There's no competition left. Just consequences, understood too late to reverse. People still talk about the check sometimes. The dramatic moment. The gift everyone saw. They don't talk about the years that followed. The structure underneath. The restraint that preserved what excitement spent. That part of the story isn't flashy. But it's the truth. Waiting didn't make me lucky. It made me ready. And when the moment finally came, quietly, legally, undeniably, I didn't need to rush into it. Because I had already been living inside the outcome. I didn't inherit more because I wanted more. I inherited more because I understood what more actually required. Sometimes the smartest move isn't reaching first. It's knowing when not to. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.